Hello, today is Friday, July 3rd. Happy 4th of July to everyone who celebrates. Happy Canada Day that's just passed if you're in Canada. And happy possible Taylor Swift wedding day for those of us who are Swifties. We're watching the news and trying to determine if we can get that real story. Is she getting married at the Madison Square Garden? Is she getting married at her house in Rhode Island? We just don't know, but I hope you have a good and relaxing holiday, however you celebrate. I'm Cindy Allen. I'm CEO of Trade Force Multiplier, a global trade consultancy service. We handle everything very complex customs issues to strategy, outreach to the boardroom, government affairs, as well as regulatory affairs, and all those pesky little inquiries you're getting from CBP these days. Welcome to Simply Trade, Cindy's version, where I base an international trade on a Taylor Swift song. Today's song is "This Is Why We Can't Have Nice Things." I'll get into that in a moment. This is brought to you in association with Global Training Center. So what happened in actual trade this week? Well, a couple of things that we're watching. One, approximately 25%, a full quarter of the House members asked the U.S. Trade Representative to allow the Jones Act waiver to actually end as scheduled in August 16th to be precise. This was previously seen as having broad support and possibly even doing away with the Jones Act. So this has been a shift and possibly could be a result of the midterms that are coming up and those representatives having to answer for those constituents back in those areas that are supporting inter-U.S. waterway trade. The Commerce Department has launched a new Section 232 investigation into a specific type of coal. That's something I didn't think I'd ever say. Coal imports being seen as a national security issue. 90% of the coal that we import comes from Colombia and Canada, and the U.S. is a net exporter, meaning we export as much as we import. So it's really interesting that the administration sees this as a possible national security issue. They have cited an increase in demand due to power needs, and they also cited the recent conflict that's going on in Iran and that has affected the Strait of Hormuz, getting additional energy resources in. Even though it's not specific to coal, it has impacted overall energy prices. So watch that if you're a net importer or if you're an importer of coal. CBP also announced that duty owed on post-summary corrections, and these are things, post-summary corrections are where corrections are made after the initial payment of duty. The goods have come in, you've made the entry summary, the duty has been paid, and you have an issue, and you need to tender additional duty. Sometimes we do ask for a refund on post-summary corrections. Sometimes it is just to correct the information that CBP has on file. However, for a post-summary correction where duty is owed, CBP is going to require on August 5th everyone to transmit that duty via ACH. So no more paper checks, no more cash deposits. They are indicating that you can pay that up front or you can wait for a bill upon liquidation. They are extending as well a 30-day deadline to file post-summary corrections in the ACE system under certain circumstances. So if you are affected by that, you'll want to look into the details of that. Reconciliation entries where the final reconciliation has not been made. So those are entries where you have something coming in where you know there's a value or a classification issue with the goods, but you aren't quite sure and you need to make entry. You flag that item for reconciliation and you pay the estimated duty up front. And then at a later time, you file what's known as an 09 reconciliation entry telling customs, oh, there was a change. Here's what the change is. For those where that final reconciliation has not been made, you can file an CAPE refund request for IEPA duties on that original entry, those original underlying entries. It went live on Monday, and by all accounts, it's been successful and going well. CBP provided also an update on CAPE to the court there have been almost 214,000 declarations filed, and those declarations are requests for refund. There's been around 104 billion accepted for refunds. They were careful to say that that has not yet been paid, but those are accepted for refunds and going through that process. Remember, in their original indications, they said that it could take 60 to 90 days after that CAPE refund request is accepted for that refund to actually be sent back to the importers. And this is to allow for the processing on their end, as well as that transfer of that refund request to the Department of Treasury, who is the one who actually lists those and gives those refunds to the importers themselves. So Treasury has to have time to do that. So, and the initial indication in the past couple of weeks that refunds have slowed have seemed to be true, and Treasury seems to be stretching those refund processes out. This was mainly seen to the fact that liquidations were happening quickly. Treasury wanted to get those processed before the liquidation happened, so it spent a lot of time and resources processing those. And now we're seeing entries that have a larger time frame for liquidation, and the U.S. Treasury and CBP are reverting to their normal refund process instead of accelerating these. So importers are seeing their refunds hit their bank accounts, just not those fast and very large refunds as when CAPE first went live. CBP also indicated that 4.36 million failed CAPE refund processes. However, they said these are basic errors. Things like there was no IEPA filed on the entry, or their past liquidation date, or another IEPA refund request through CAPE has been filed. So not those complicated things we were hearing about before, about tariff stacking and other items. Those renewed reject messages via ABI seem to be working and clarifying for the customs brokers, although we're still seeing some issues as customs brokers as they are filing the CAPE requests. On to other things. The U.S. formally announced the withdrawal from USMCA. This starts the 10-year clock and allows revisions. And I would say this is essentially the death knell of the free trade era. The USMCA and its predecessor NAFTA were seen as the premier free trade agreements, and most other free trade agreements were based on some sort of function or language that USMCA or NAFTA had. So the fact that the CBP and the U.S. government has indicated they're walking back from USMCA, they are withdrawing from that, really does demonstrate that the free trade era has gone away. In very interesting news, the Department of Justice announced a settlement with Alibaba, the online retail merchant, and its AUS Merchant Services, their U.S. payment processor. The settlement is $600 million, and the settlement centered around the allegation of violations of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. The allegation was that Alibaba failed to stop merchants from offering illegal or products that were in violation of the Food and Drug and Cosmetic Act. In the past, the government has sought to hold these platforms accountable and responsible with limited success. Many of them argued that, look, we're no different than we're no different than a brick and mortar store. You don't go into a store where those goods are offered and hold that store liable for some violation. You hold the manufacturer or producer liable for that good. But this really does attempt to hold the online or merchant retailer responsible for offering products that don't meet the guidelines into the U.S. This is really concerning, as the government seems to be seeking to hold the platform responsible for the goods that it doesn't even own in many cases. In many cases, those goods are simply offered. They are simply a merchant and helping the seller and the buyer hold hands in that transaction and process. So this really does support the trend of holding every part of the supply chain responsible And they are attempting to ensure that every part of that supply chain do not just due diligence, but have a responsibility that we've never seen before. We really see this repeated in the executive order that came out on strengthening customs authority and enforcement. They're attempting to hold the customs broker responsible for the behavior of their clients. And I see this very similar, in a very similar vein. The government is attempting to hold the party that's simply offering these goods in a manner that makes them available to U.S. consumers. They're holding them responsible. So this is quite a huge settlement, and I think it's going to be a wake-up call for the merchants, the e-commerce industry overall. And although, no one should be offering goods that are in violation of a law, specifically the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, that is scary. We all want to use safe products on our body, on our faces, and consume safe products. However, where does the responsibility lie? That's really where I have some concern. And I think this is, one of the things one of the reasons why I chose This Is Why We Can't Have Nice Things. So the lyrics that really stood out to me were, "So why'd you have to rain on my parade? I'm shaking my head and locking the gates. This is why we can't have nice things, because you break them and I had to take them away." So I think there's a little bit of that on both sides in this court case, really, is that you should not be offering products that are in violation. However, you're basing that assessment on the information that you're given. And as a customs broker specifically, I think we rely on the information that we're given. We have limited ability to determine if that product is in violation or if that company is in violation. If we see fraudulent behavior, yes, the new customs regulations require that we report that behavior if we have left a client for purposes of observing fraud. However, absent that, we really don't have the tools or the necessary funds or the authority to do that type of investigation into those products. And I think that does extend to some of the e-commerce merchants, as we're seeing here. What authority do they actually have to ensure that those products, what tools do they have to ensure that those products are not in violation of U.S. law? That is a conundrum that I think that is going to continue to affect what we as U.S. consumers can buy and how we can ensure that we have variety, not just able to go to a U.S. Brick and mortar store, but also have that opportunity to buy from other countries, buy from other retailers that aren't in our local area. So I worry that this is going to have a chilling effect on the items that are available, not just those in violation, but all products, because now that's setting a precedent that these online merchants have to ensure that these products are what they say they are, that they do not violate any type of law or any type of regulation coming into the U.S. And how are they going to do that? What tools do they have? Are they going to have to test everyone? That adds an additional burden and cost for those companies when they don't own or possess the title to those goods. So we'll continue to watch it. Hopefully you have nice things this weekend. We'll talk to you.